motif that runs through what you're talking about is often about listening to children, giving them the space, giving them the sense of agency. And something I wanted to ask you about was it's almost the belief that of what children are capable of, and you mentioned about letting them be silly when you had that session, and you said, look, be silly, there's nothing, just do it. As adults, when I've facilitated sessions on design thinking, for example, the amount of coaxing and to get adults to be silly,
That's hard.
it's unbelievable. And to find, and of course that is where the creativity starts to happen in design thinking. If you talk about what Seth Godin calls the dip, and then after that, after all the obvious things come out and all the deeply ingrained patterns have run their course, and then you're left in that kind of nether region, and then it starts to spark.
Exactly.
And it's strange so that we've got to really go through these very well scaffolded processes to tap into something that is our birthright. So
And
what's happening there?
but it's the it's back to that point about so the United Nations have that play is a right, is a human right for children.
Mhm.
That we know that children will not develop well without play. But there's something very strange that happens because it seems to be only applied to the early years. So by the time that children are 7, their playgrounds get less playgroundy. Actually, by the time they're in secondary school, the playgrounds have nothing to play with anyway. And the notion of play becomes like almost a sin. It's like the idea of playing is absolutely preposterous. However, the way we work best as human beings is when we allow ourselves the chance to play. If you think about the most interesting stuff that happens in terms of invention, creativity, science, it's people playing with ideas. Like the part of work should be about playing because this is the bit that you're going to allow your mind to just move forward. And why are we stopping play at a young age? Why are we not encouraging a playful approach to sort of bring that the joy in learning and also the appetite to learn? That's the thing that I find completely well. It's antithesis to learning. Learning and play is the same thing.
Yeah.
You learn through play. You explore your world. You challenge yourself. This is just the most natural way of engaging with the world around you, and it's safe.
Why is that? I mean, do you think it's, you mentioned earlier the Victorian model. Do you think it's this, possibly this sort of hangover from the Industrial Revolution model of education, where we are educating children to get ready to be productive members of society, i.e., contribute to the economy, and
Hmm.
therefore we need them to be serious as quickly as possible and ready for the adult world? Do you think it's a hangover from that, or am I missing
Oh
something?
no, absolutely. And it's quite, I think it's something that both Ken Robinson and Sugata Mitra are very vocal about. I know I'm throwing out all these names, but it's because it's something that is just so, it's so well recognized within the education industry that, the role of play in learning is there. We're just not using it. And that the way we're doing things in an antiquated model, we know that. This is like an established thing, but we don't know how to change it. And I think yes, I have this idea of, let's go Finnish model full of, the whole way towards the Scandinavian countries. They've managed to do it, but they've been working on it since 76,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So it's going to take time. And I think we need to take sort of steps to sort of show the value of these approaches into the current model, because that's how we're going to be able to do it. That to me is the key to do it. And in terms of the value of children's ideas, that's something that I had an amazing experience doing when I was doing Little Inventors, because in the 4 years I was there, I think we produced about 350 inventions. So basically getting children to come up with an idea, partnering them with a maker, like a professional artist, and bringing their ideas to life. Not Dragon's Den, but really all about celebrating their imagination.
Mhm.
And every single time when we spoke to the children about their ideas, there was always something behind it that was incredibly thoughtful, or a reason or something. So there was the little girl who was 8 called Emily, and she came up with the silent ear covers. And it was like a
I
pair of,
saw those.
so that
They're amazing.
it's like a
Yeah.
pair of ears that you could just plug in, and it just looked like ears. And the point for Emily was that she's autistic, and she's got sensory overload, and so she can't really stand too much noise. But she doesn't want to have to wear headphones because then she stands out, and that's also a no-no for her. So she wanted something that would make her sort of safe, but also not necessarily come through. So we created this object and she was able to use them. And we had an amazing message from her parents after a few months who said, before she got involved in this, she did okay. She was just like one of the middle children, you know. She sort of like, she neither particularly great, neither particularly bad. She was very quiet. But since she's had this opportunity and to get her ideas seen and done, she's become a little chatterbox and she's coming up with things and she's sort of like she's much more sort of positive in the classroom and she's here. And to be able to do something like that, you know, this didn't take like a year of learning. This took like one initiative that was, you know, a few hours, and that was a seed for her of sort of self-awareness and self-confidence that she can take in everything else she does. So that to me is what we should try to do, is how do we bring these sort of nuggets of inspiration to children to sort of get them on their way.
Yeah, so this comes back to what you're talking about, is how you've positioned the work that you do. Is it's almost like, okay, I'm not advocating for things to always be this way, but I mean, there's an awareness, of course, of if it's going to take a while to change, and I totally, I like the way you're framing it about the move towards, we can't replicate the Finnish model, because I mean, we're talking about nature based learning right now, and suddenly it's like, okay, let's do nature based learning, but the Finns and the Danes had, forest schools since I think the 60s, even 50s or 60s. So that's something you can't just kind of drop in. And of course, the danger is if you drop an initiative down and it's not properly supported and it's not phased in, and it doesn't work, then people think there's something wrong with the initiative rather than the strategy,
Exactly,
and that
exactly.
that takes away the momentum for change. So where you're working is trying to sort of show that it doesn't have to be that way, and you're finding that you're able to make an impact with just targeted initiatives.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the if I look at what we have achieved with, you know, Little Inventors, where I was for 4 years, so that's the thing I can talk the most about right now. But you know, we did an amazing challenge with the Canadian Space Agency in Canada and the Canadian government. And so what my role in it was to create resources. So I created these resources which were for teachers but children facing. So there has a lot of nice illustration. It was all about the tone that sort of worked with children, but with proper learning in it, because it's possible. Like the two don't have to be antithesis. You can have fun and learn. Absolutely part of it. And these resources were downloaded over 3,000 times by teachers in Canada. All of that without just through word of mouth and social media. There was no big campaigns, and we had again thousands of entries to it, and amazing ideas, really fun things. 30 objects were made, and then we had two that actually went to the International Space Station. That was shown as the first art exhibition in the International Space Station. So, you know, this was just based on like an online platform, some resources delivered by teachers in their home country, and then the whole process went from there. You know, this is not something which takes. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It is a little bit, but not that much. Keep on doing it.
It's not brain surgery. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a really good example of, you know, how you can do simple things. If you understand for me, it's all about understanding the audience. If you understand who you're talking to, if you understand that you're talking to the children, but really you're also talking to the teachers and how you can help both getting into it,
Yeah.
then you have something that is usable, that is properly useful, and that can take you places.
Yeah.
Space.
Yeah. And of course, the hope, I guess, is that I mean, if you think about the impact these things have, and of course, you've got the children going home and talking excitedly to their parents, and you see parents, like the feedback you had with the girl with the fake ears, which I saw them and it just stood out straight away as just such a great thing. Um, then the hope, of course, is that people will see, hey, there's something in this. What concerns me is that whether the people who are administrating the system or perpetuating the structures of the system are able to see that this isn't an episodic thing. This
Hmm.
can be the thing
Yeah.
that we do. Any insights on how we get from there to there? What's in the middle? Because I don't fully know. I don't really.
I
I've not been
think
able
it's
to think about solving.
we were talking before this about the tribe. You know, there's a whole bunch of us basically who are working in this field, and I think there's definitely a movement
Yeah.
coming through with that. And the best, and you can see it also coming from things like universities. So in the UK, you have a number of universities that are really looking at how you learn. So the School of Education in Sussex and things like that, and the language that comes out of it is that there's no such thing as lost learning. We have to stop talking about the lost learning during the pandemic because children learn in different ways. And anyway, what you learn at school is not what you're going to do in life. And science changes from the moment you're at school and when you're grown up. Like so many dinosaurs didn't exist when I was a kid. Do you know what I mean? So we've got to equip children, and how do we get the junction to that is the big question, obviously. But we have to sort of get much more. We've got to get these sort of initiatives going that can then be evidence based by working with people who are, in research. For example, universities are a really good place to do that as well. So really sort of showing the value of things. What I find really interesting on a very simple level is, for example, China, which is always held as one of the nations that has got all its maths and science so well that we all feel like we've got to sort of catch up with them. Well, what are they doing at the moment? They're employing people from the Institute of Education to go over in England. They're sort of shipping them over to China because they want to teach creative thinking, because what they know is that they're very good at production, but they're not very good at coming up with ideas, which is why they keep on copying stuff. So, so, but if China, the nation of this sort of like rote learning, is now thinking about creative learning and creative thinking,
Mhm.
surely that's a really good indication of what how the wind is blowing.
Yeah, you would hope so. I mean, it's amazing the weight of evidence that's required before a change. I mean, I was reading that before they decided to take the lead out of petrol, there was something like 670 gold standard studies that demonstrated the adverse effects on health. And it took, and you think surely after 100 there would be an
Enough.
idea to make a change. But so I guess patience is a thing. So maybe these initiatives are sort of chipping away at the structure. Um,
Yes, I mean I wish things could happen faster, and I wish we could get to this level. And there's a level of experts not being heard. Is that familiar in any sort of ways? There's a great, for me, there's certainly a frustration because I've been working in education for as long as I have now. I could see there was for example, in the UK, there was the primary review that happened in 1910, sorry, 1910, 2010, and it was all about how we are going to transform primary education to something that was much more holistic, cross-curricular, and the sort of model that we know is the model that works, and it was evidenced. And the first thing that happens is that we have a new government that comes in, and the first thing they do is send a Bible to every school. And all of this sort of evidence work that had been done, built over years, was just shelved.
yeah.
And there's something quite criminal about that, frankly, to me.
Yes. And it's interesting what, for example, Scotland have done, that they're moving to enshrine the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child
Hmm.
into law. And I wonder if that's an approach, because something has to be almost above politics, to make sure that initiatives have are allowed to gather momentum. Because it's like you say, they're not. This is not going to happen in a 4-year political term.
No.
Um,
Or a 10 one.
or a 10-1. So maybe that's part of it. I mean, if you were to be, I mean, there are schools springing up that are sort of outside the system now. We're both
Funny enough.
connected to Learn Life in Barcelona and the Green School in Bali and Real School in Budapest and all these places. Um, if you were to be handed a school, there you go. I mean, what would be the principles around which you would structure it?
First of all, I would panic massively. Oh my God, the
Yeah,
responsibility again. Um,
behind the scenes.
Well, for me, there's again that sort of element of child agency, democracy. So we want children to have, we have so many things that these children are confronted with. So we've got the uncertainty about the future. We've got the sort of the real threat that misinformation and fake news and all this stuff is also in it. How do you sort of make the part of that? And there's also the mental health crisis, which is absolutely upon us. And so, what we need to do is really sort of how we address these things. And the only way we can do that is really by putting the children at the heart of the agenda, and the teachers and the people that are working with them, to understand what their needs are. So, the agency aspect, which I keep on talking about, the second you start talking to children about, there's this idea that they're very cute and, they're not really to be trusted. You can't really trust children because they're a bit unpredictable. Um, Give children a sense of responsibility about something and see them fly with it.
Yeah.
So, organizing schools in a way that offers a democratic element that allows them to discuss things that they care about, things that they will actually want to learn about, bring that in, sort of. The themes are always going to be quite common, and all these themes are also going to absolutely come back with some of the things that traditional education wants to see. Because you can bring science when you talk about the environment, you can bring maths if you talk about how things are built. There's a lot of ways of doing this thing, but we've just got to flip how we approach things. So, for my approach, would be really a self-centered, like a child-centered, play-based, and equally democratic approach that would be looking at skills first and using the subjects as inspiration. That's what would fire my belly.
When you say subjects, would you work transversally, or would you keep the subjects as they are?
You know what? I wouldn't even that for me the less barrier the better, and I'm probably going to sound like a lunatic, but we know, like we talk about STEAM or STEM a lot. We know that there's you can't really talk about science without maths, without engineering, without all of this stuff. And STEM has gathered so much momentum in the last few years. Like everyone talks about STEM, 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 or STEAM, if we're lucky to include the arts, which is still a tiny A in the STEM generally. But this is not the only, we have the humanities. How do we work with that? There's the link between music and maths, for example, is so strong. Why are we not, you could teach so much through music. I mean, the example is as a French person, I studied English when I was 11 at school, and it went in like butter. And the reason why that happened is because I was a massive fan of music and I knew everything by the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel by heart before I started school. I didn't know what the words were, but it was all in my ears.
Yeah.
So there are so many opportunities, exciting opportunities that are cross curricular that can come from different areas, and and I get it. It's overwhelming to think, well, there's so much, and we have to reinvent everything. But there's a lot of people out there that can do this and that do it actually. There are a lot of brilliant initiatives across the world, and we are now in a world that is so connected that there's no reason why that can't be made more accessible. So I'm not advocating a worldwide curriculum because, but actually a level of making the most of resources that are there and involving the people who can actually bring these things to life. We have a lot of companies around the world that have real skills that they can showcase. Bringing that in as well, creating these resources, I think that's something that has the potential of really changing things. So yes, I probably wouldn't silo subjects entirely, no.
Yeah. I've certainly been of the mind for quite a while that subjects are quite an artificial concept anyway, and it's like you say, they always touch upon such other things, and the reason why we might not, maths, for example, is so many people that think they don't enjoy maths because they experienced it in this bubble, unconnected to the real world. And it's actually, I mean, and I'm one of those people
Mhm.
who later in life saw the beauty in it and saw how it was connected to explaining so much in the world, and wished that it had been presented like that when I was a child, because things might have been different. Um,
Exactly.
so one way of looking at it is it's a threatening experience, like any change, that, oh, we've got to reinvent this, and how do we understand things if there's no barriers and no boxes? But it's also tremendously empowering,
Hmm.
um, especially when we, as you say, accept that we don't have to have all the answers, and there are lots of people around us. And when you ask companies and you ask experts and you ask parents and you ask communities, there's something we can all agree on, and that is that we want to do the right thing by the next generation. There's so little resistance to that. And my
Yes.
only worry, and I wonder if you share it, is that we don't have the luxury of all the time, because the world is changing. We talk about the VUCA world and all of
Yes.
this. And, last year has taught us very clearly volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity are hallmarks of the future. It's
Yes.
only going to be more so. And I wonder, do you share this sort of feeling that hey, we don't really have all the time in the world to make this change.
Yes, absolutely. I feel a lot of pressure from that. Having, I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old at home. I see, I ask myself, I think this last year has been a huge year for assessment, for self-assessment for everyone. We've all, like, through so many different circumstances, some of us have been fairly lucky through it, some of them have not been. But like this sort of, we've had an opportunity to just look at our lives and just go, what's going on? And I think a lot of parents are thinking that too, and looking at how their children are, they've had also a prime insight into how their children are taught. And what I hear from a lot of parents is to go, what is going on? Because that's not helpful. That's, again, within the realm of, yes, it's amazing that a lot of it has happened. But, there was like a massive difference between that first lockdown where the emphasis was so much on mental health and well-being, so that the kids that were still at school were playing, and the kids at home were giving like quite a minimal amount of things so that they could just get on with things. And obviously that poses some challenges because how do you occupy the kids, etc. But the second lockdown was the opposite. The second lockdown has been, we must catch up, we must catch up, we must catch up. And everyone felt it, the kids, the teachers, and the parents. And was that a better learning experience? It really wasn't. Actually, there's a lot of children now who are really suffering from anxiety and such. And I think that's the worry, is that we have a whole generation. It's not about the lost learning, it's about the mental health. I think the biggest conversation that we've got to tackle now is mental health, and how we're going to support them to that future, which is so full of uncertainties, and God knows what else we're going to get coming our way.
Yeah,
So it's not something that we can afford to wait to do. And that's certainly something that I'm working towards as well. I mean, I'm hoping to be everything that I'm talking about. I'm basically trying to put my actions where my words are, and work on that as well. Um, and I think the only way that we're going to do that is by keep on connecting with the same sort of community of people, and sort of pushing these initiatives and showing the value of them, because that's and trying to make them as accessible as we can. One of the issues is that you talk about these brilliant schools that are popping up around the world, but they're just still the exception.
yeah,
And we are now in a world that is so connected that there is an opportunity to reach there, to sort of go, how do we use this amazing technology that we do have to make things accessible, not just to the few, but to
yeah,
everybody else as well. And we've got to start changing minds and perspective from this sort of negative view of how we can't do things, to the one where actually, yes, we can change how we do things, because we know that it can happen. We see it. We can see how fast the world has changed with the pandemic to adapt. That's one of the big lessons of it.
yeah.
So that lesson we need to teach ourselves that lesson, and go with it and run with it as much as we can.
Well, let's hope we can do that. And it's like you say, there has been a realization, and it was almost like in the first lockdown that it was a moment where we could have built upon that, but then almost the old pattern of behavior comes in. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what happens when you measure the success of a nation by GDP per capita, is the fear of the economic stagnation, and the cogs stopping turning. And and that's what seems to have happened in the second lockdown, wasn't it? We need to keep moving, we need to keep the
Yes,
system turning over. But somewhere in the middle, there will be people who have come to that realization that this is not, it's not
I,
healthy.
I
Yeah.
think so.
On that note, and just to end it on something positive, I'm very glad and enthused and encouraged that there are people like you out there doing
Thank you.
this, and not just talking about it, but actually, putting it into action. And I'm glad that there's people out there, that we have this sense of community, that we can connect, share the ideas,
Exactly.
go back out and keep fighting that good fight. So thank you
Exactly.
for everything you've shared.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it was brilliant conversation to have, and it's because it's always good to know that we are, there's more of us, and we can make it happen. We can do that.
We can. Just maybe not by next week, but we can do it, right?
So, let's enjoy the kids. Let's have a bit of a break.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing that. It's been a pleasure, and love to have you back again for a chat.
Absolutely brilliant.